In this note from Maurice Nicoll's psychological commentaries, he speaks about concept of conscience in the work, and the note begins very directly in resonance, in relation to the four ideals. And I'm going to quote a few passages before I read the full note, because, like I say, this one has really impacted me because it's very powerful in a number of ways, both in a religious unification sense, which the four ideals is ultimately all about, and which I will be speaking about moving forward. And he also gives a lot of practical things one can observe, one can bring in. So very practical, that we can observe in ourselves and bring into our own inner work. But he begins by saying, as you know, in the experiment of religion as a means of conveying teachings from conscious to sleeping humanity, one of the sources of failure is that each person sets up his own dogma as absolute truth, and as people persecute, despise, and kill each other in the name of God. And so, if you are aware of the concept of religion in Gurdjieff's Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, you will know that his endlessness, the creator of all the universe, over time sends avatars, prophets down to teach humanity across time, across geographical locality, across space. God has sent down the prophets, and I believe that they all come from the same source, whether it's Buddha in the East or Abraham and Moses and Jesus in the West, or Gurdjieff himself later on. As Maurice Nicoll begins this letter, the idea is to give the teachings to sleeping humanity, to go from the conscious inner circle of humanity, if you like, if we draw from J.G. Bennett, to the sleeping humanity. And in the New Testament, the apostles asked Jesus, why do you teach them in parables? And he says, well, because that's the only way I can get it across. I can't give them the full force of my message because it'll be too much. I have to teach in parables, plant the seeds. There's the parable of the sower. I plant the seed. If it is planted into good ground, then it can blossom forth and bring understanding and knowledge. So that's the first point. And then he goes into one of the biggest issues that humanity, this seed doesn't take root in humanity, is, of course, as I read, because of the sleep, because we are not one, we are many. And so, as we spoke about in the last letter, man is not a unity, but multiple. And then he goes on the second page to give a lot of practical things we can observe in ourselves. He goes on to speak about buffers, and we'll get to the letter in a moment, but I want to preface it by sharing these ideas so that when they come up, you're already primed for them. He talks about buffers, and he says, what especially prevent a man from seeing contradictions in himself are buffers. In place of having real conscience, a man has artificial conscience and buffers. And here he goes to say what makes up these buffers and what has gone to develop these buffers, and what we can observe in ourselves when we perform our self-observation, and these particular things that come up in every person. He says, behind everyone there stand years and years of wrong and stupid life, of indulgence in every kind of weakness, of sleep, of ignorance, of pretense, of lack of effort, of drifting, of shutting one's eyes, of striving to avoid unpleasant facts, of constant lying to oneself, of abuse and of blaming others, of fault-finding, of self-justifying, of emptiness, of wrong talking, and so on. So I thought I'd shine a spotlight on those things, because we can look for them in ourselves, of course, in other people also, but what's important is to look for them in ourselves. Again, drawing from the Gospels, Jesus says, don't worry about the speck in your brother's eye. First, take the mote out of your own eye. And of course, Maurice Nicoll, who was very influenced by Christianity and the Gospels, would agree with this. It is easier to see things in other people, but when you see something very clearly in another person, be sure to see it as a mirror to your own inner life and not to cast judgment on those. But anyway, this is a rather long commentary on this commentary from Maurice Nicoll, a letter on conscience. But I hope you find it valuable, that you can take away the philosophical side and also the practical side and bring it in to your own daily life. Concept of conscience in the work. Consciousness and conscience are similar in their respective spheres, one being in the intellectual centre, the other in the emotional centre. Consciousness is knowing all together. Conscience is feeling all together. Conscience. As you know, in the experiment of religion as a means of conveying teaching from conscious to sleeping humanity, one of the sources of failure is that each person sets up his own dogma as absolute truth, and so people persecute, despise, and kill each other in the name of God. They may do so very earnestly and say that they act from conscience, but this is false or mechanical conscience and is formed in personality. This false or acquired conscience is not based on inner understanding. It is related to false personality, and so to feeling the merit and therefore feeling that one is right and better than others, and that others who have different religious beliefs are inferior or wicked and contemptible and worthy to be killed. The difference between real conscience and mechanical or false conscience is that real conscience is the same in all men and speaks, as it were, the same language. Mechanical or false conscience is different in different people according to their nationality, upbringing, customs, forms of belief, etc. If all men could awaken, real conscience would speak in them all, and they would agree with one another, because it would speak in the same way to everyone. Real conscience exists in everyone but is buried and so out of reach. Personality has grown over it, and as a result our feelings, our sense of ourselves has shifted to personality. Therefore to feel altogether is impossible, and indeed would be unendurable as we are. To feel altogether would mean that we were one, but personality is divided into little bits, as it were. The fundamental thing to grasp about personality is that it is multiple. For this reason you now feel in one way and now in another way, but separately and not together, and without even remembering, just as you think now in one way, then in another, or believe now in one way and then in another. And to all this shifting kaleidoscope within you, you say, I. That is, you imagine you are one person. As long as a man takes himself as one person, he will never move from where he is. To awaken to conscience, you must begin to see the contradictions in yourself. But if you try to see contradictions in yourself, taking yourself all the time as one person, you will get nowhere. Indeed, you will stand in your own way, and instead of stepping aside, will create an impossible situation. It would be just as if you believed everything you saw in front of you was a part of your body. What especially prevent a man from seeing contradictions in himself are buffers. In place of having real conscience, a man has artificial conscience and buffers. Behind everyone there stand years and years of wrong and stupid life, of indulgence in every kind of weakness, of sleep, of ignorance, of pretense, of lack of effort, of drifting, of shutting one's eyes, of striving to avoid unpleasant facts, of constant lying to oneself, of abuse and blaming of others, of fault-finding, of self-justifying, of emptiness, of wrong-talking, and so on. As a result, the human machine is dirty and works wrongly. Not only this, but artificial appliances have been created in it due to its wrong way of working. And however a person may wish to wake up and become another person and lead another life, these artificial appliances interfere very much with his good intentions. They are called buffers. Like the contrivances on railway carriages, their action is to lessen the shock of collision. But in the case of buffers in man, their action is to prevent two contradictory sides of himself from coming into consciousness together. Buffers are created gradually and involuntarily by the life around us in which we are brought up. Their action is to prevent a man from feeling conscience, that is, from feeling altogether. For example, very strong buffers exist between our likes and dislikes, between our pleasant feelings towards someone and our unpleasant feelings. To break a buffer, it is necessary to observe oneself over a long period and to remember how one felt and how one is feeling. That is, it is necessary to see on both sides of a buffer together, to see the contradictory sides of oneself that are separated by the buffer. Once a buffer is broken, it cannot form again. Buffers make a man's life more easy. They prevent him from feeling real conscience, but they also prevent him from developing. Inner development depends on shocks. Only shocks can lead a man out of the state he is in. When a man realizes something about himself, he suffers a shock, but the presence of buffers in him will prevent him from realizing anything, for buffers are made to lessen shocks. The more a man observes himself, the more likely will it be for him to begin to see buffers in himself. The reason is that the more you observe yourselves, the more you will catch glimpses of yourselves as a whole. If you observe different moments of your lives, after a time you catch a glimpse of yourself over a period altogether. That is, your consciousness of yourself increases. But first you must try to observe everything in yourself at a given moment. The emotional state, thoughts, sensations, intentions, posture, movements, tone of voice, facial expression, and so on. All these must be photographed together. This is full observation, and from this begin three things. 1. A new memory of oneself. 2. A complete change in the conception one previously had of oneself. And 3. The development of inner taste in regard to the quality of what one is observing internally. For instance, by inner taste you can recognize that you are lying or in a negative state without difficulty, although you are justifying yourself and protesting you are not. Here the whole thing turns upon whether you possess inner sincerity or not. If not, then best to give up the work. Inner taste can be said to be the faint beginning of real conscience, because it is something that recognizes the quality of one's inner state. Self-observation and inner taste are not the same, but may coincide. The more you understand the work, the more it is arranged rightly in your mind and its meaning seen. The more does it pass into real conscience. It is sometimes said that if we had real conscience, the work would be unnecessary, for we would know it already.